So here's a quick breakdown of my Terminator 2029 short. We all know the best parts of any Terminator film are the future war sequences, and I find it particularly fascinating how these scenes were pulled off on the first movie on such a low budget. So my short is basically a hybrid of different beats seen in the first 3 films. There's the establishing wide shot and hunter-killer flyovers from the first film, the medium shot T-800 reveal and background explosion from T2, and the close-up and look into camera shot from T3. I've become a fan of the type of elegant shot design you often see from Spielberg or Cameron, where you get multiple compositions and story beats just through actors blocking and simply panning and tilting the camera. So I wanted to try to emulate that in Blender, which is my weapon of choice. The assets were largely made up of store-bought assets from CG Trader. There's the hunter killers, buildings, cars, debris, and anything I needed to fill out the world. I did some modifications on these assets. For example, the hunter killers, I added some searchlights using geocones with a volume shader and a few point lights parented to the rig. My approach to building the set was inspired by how they did the practical set on the first movie, which was a mix of detailed assets in the foreground and then simple cutouts for the background, and then harmonized together with fog and backlighting to create depth and atmosphere. Similarly, I used a lot of 2D cards for the background buildings and then filled the set with fog using the volume shader, which always looks pretty neat. The T-800 I modeled, textured, and rigged from scratch. This could be a whole tutorial in and of itself. It's an old personal project of mine that I've gotten a lot of mileage out of over the years, and this short was just my latest excuse to use it again. If you want to own the asset, you can download my Blender file off CG Trader using the link below. The T-1000 was just a generic man I downloaded from Mixamo. I sculpted his face features to make him resemble Robert Patrick a bit more, and then just added the principled shader with metalness cranked to 1 and roughness at near 0, and then made sure I had a good HDRI dome so he could reflect something. His blade was done with a blend shape I used to basically morph the vertices of his hand into a blade shape. One trick I used for his distinctive motion was averaging out all the keyframes on his animation. I downloaded some animation clips from Mixamo and then used the smooth command in the animation curve editor to make his movements appear more fluid and graceful, which is accurate to what you see in T2. It's interesting to think that what took a team of geniuses and millions of dollars back in '91 can now be done by some guy on his home PC for free. The character animations for the T-800s were also downloaded from Mixamo, which I've used extensively before. Animation is kind of a weak spot for me, so whenever I can make use of motion capture, I try to do so. Luckily, their library is pretty robust. For each character, I then did a follow path constraint to a curve, and then controlled their motion that way. I looped this motion for the background characters so I could have them walking into shot over and over. This gives the illusion that there are more T-800s than there actually are, since you're basically just seeing the same 5 or 6 over and over. Cheats like this were important to keep the scene light and fast to render. The lasers were created using a plugin called Pew Pew, which allows you to create lasers by simply clicking one button. From there, you can then adjust for color, length, and other parameters to match the lasers seen in the films. It's a very handy plugin. The explosions were simply image sequences I downloaded and put onto 2D cards. I then cranked up the emission attribute on the shader to have the explosions act as like a light source. It was a very low-tech way to add production value. I also augmented this with some floating particles in the shot, made to look like embers. Sound effects were pulled from an awesome YouTube channel called That SFX Guy. Their channel has a great library of random sound effects from classic films, and it's an excellent resource for fan films like this. It was important to me that the distinct Terminator laser sound was used, rather than something from a generic sound effects library. This is one of my biggest pet peeves about Terminator 3. It's a big budget movie that uses some pretty lame stock sound effects. Instead, I wanted to capture the soundscape of the Cameron films, which sound much more distinct and tailored. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to shed some light on my process because the original video has done much better than I expected. If you want to see more one-shot films, leave a comment for any ideas that you may have. The next one I have in mind involves something a bit more alien, so stay tuned for that. Also, if you're interested in what I do, consider checking out my animated film Wake the Dead, which I think you'll enjoy. Thanks for watching.